Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Witch's Path, Advancing Your Craft at Every Level, by Thorn Mooney. Narrated by Joana Garcia. Introduction. It's a full moon tonight. I gaze out my kitchen window, watching dark clouds roll across the night sky. It's too bright to see the stars. Online, they're calling it a supermoon because it's closer to Earth in its orbit than usual, which makes it appear particularly large. This, combined with gently swaying poplars and crickets chirruping in the summer air, makes for a picturesque backdrop to any television-worthy witchcraft ritual. There was a time in my life, particularly toward the beginning of my practice of the craft, when I would have planned an elaborate working to mark the occasion. The full moon is a great time to work magic, and I would have taken advantage of the opportunity. Maybe a spell for wealth or luck. Maybe I would have written a meditation and blended an appropriate incense to encourage visions. Maybe I would have cleansed and reconsecrated my altar and simply sat in silent prayer. But not tonight. I had a long day at work and have a lot of other things on my mind. My boss is driving me nuts. I'm worried that I've misbudgeted and won't have enough money to pay the car repair bill I just received. And I still need to figure out what weekend would be good for our next coven meeting. I try to schedule 2 per month, but between a full-time job, birthdays, illnesses, and travel, it's more like once per month. I'm exhausted, and I just want to sit on my couch with a glass of wine and the remote control. That would be okay every now and then, but the truth is that I've made a bit of a habit out of this. This isn't the first full moon I've skipped. I flop on the couch and reach for my date book, which I maintain fervently. I have to, or my whole life would fall apart. In all the chaos of last month, I missed the summer solstice. I organized a ritual for some of my coven mates and spent the day at a festival with my local pagan community. But I didn't take the time to do something to mark the season in a personal way. Those 2 events were fun, but they were more for others than me. My job as the high priestess of my coven is to teach my tradition to others and to model effective ritual for my students. My personal spiritual growth and relationship with our gods is a part of that. That's how I got here in the first place. But my obligations to others are the priority. The festival was fun, but I was there as a presenter. Functionally, I was there to work, not to celebrate. So even though I did things for the solstice, I didn't necessarily do things that fed my own craft and nurtured my own spirit. After months of this, I'm starting to feel it. No wonder I feel so disconnected these days. I've been working as a priestess, but I haven't been doing it in such a way that refuels me. I'm speaking and writing for pagan communities, but I've been neglecting my own spiritual needs. I'm a coven leader and a high priestess, but somewhere along the way, I stopped being a witch. I didn't even know that was possible. It's time to just admit it. I've fallen into a magical rut. I'm not sure exactly when it happened, but I recognize the feeling because after more than 20 years of practicing witchcraft, I've been here before. Hitting the wall. I discovered Wicca in my early teens, inspired, like many, by movies and television shows. I devoured books and websites. It was the late 90s, so there weren't as many of the latter. Learning as much as I could, as fast as I could. I discovered the great variety of witchcrafts in the world. Wicca was only one side of a long and intricate story. I explored as many as I could. I met others, got involved in several different pagan and witch communities, and ultimately joined a coven in the Gardnerian tradition and became a high priestess in my own right. Social media opened up countless ways to meet and learn from witches and other types of magicians all over the world. There are now thousands of books to choose from and specialty retailers that cater to witches, both online and off, based in towns and cities all over the world. It's easier than it's ever been to develop as a witch. But sometimes things just don't go that smoothly. As blessed as my life has been, there have been points in my path as a witch where I have felt stuck, stagnant, unsure of where to go next. Most recently, that happened as a coven leader. I had spent so much time turning my spirituality into my job that I'd lost the magic of it all, which is how I ended up on that couch, ignoring a gorgeous full moon to watch TV and sulk. Years before that, I'd been a seeker with more book knowledge than experience, frustrated in my search for advanced books and teachers who could take me beyond what I'd already been doing on my own. I was lucky enough to find a coven and a tradition that helped push me out of that rut. But many witches don't have access to those kinds of opportunities, or else they prefer to remain solitary. And by the way, being in a coven doesn't mean you won't experience stagnation. And then there was my very first hurdle as a witch, getting started. I remember discovering witchcraft and borrowing my first books and falling in love. I felt like my whole world was blown open in an instant. There was so much to learn and try. Where to even start? How would I know if I was doing it right? How would I find guidance in the midst of so much misinformation? It ended up taking months to work up the courage to try my first rituals and to begin building a personal practice. When you first begin exploring witchcraft, life feels almost overwhelmingly magical. From the outside, it's easy to think that witches are ethereal people who spend their days glorifying the beauty of nature, harnessing arcane powers, and building meaningful ritual into every mundane activity. But the truth is that we're all still just human beings. We have stressful jobs, and car payments, and family drama, and days when we just don't feel very magical. Sometimes life gets so crazy that we put our spirituality on the back burner. Finding yourself on a magical plateau is actually a common experience, though the particular challenges we face at any given time may be different. You may be trying to negotiate how to fit a craft practice into your chaotic daily schedule. On the other hand, you may have all the time in the world, but are so bogged down by new information and magical theory that you don't know how to begin applying it. In wider pagan and witch communities, you'll sometimes hear people talk about the armchair occultist, a person who has a lot of book knowledge but doesn't actually do anything with it. It's common for both beginning and advanced practitioners to find themselves in this position. Just like burnout and exhaustion, these can leave us stuck on magical and spiritual plateaus. Though these scenarios are different, the fundamental question in each case is the same. Where do I go next? How to use this book. This book was born out of those bumps that arise throughout a witch's life, and it's suitable for all but the most absolute of beginners, such as, I won't spend much time on basic vocabulary or endlessly list all the types of witchcraft you might choose from. What do you do in those moments when you feel stuck, lost, burned out, or just unsure of how to take that next step? How do you revive a lagging practice or kickstart a new one? How do you harness or recapture the magic in your life? Wherever you find yourself in this moment, overwhelmed, budding witch, disillusioned, adept, jaded, coven leader, or anywhere in between, how do you take your witchcraft to the next level? If you've never even tried to cast a spell before, but you've been dying to try and already think of yourself as a witch in your heart, this book is as much for you as anyone. If you've been running a coven for years, but still feel like you need encouragement and a fresh perspective, this book is for you too. Together, we'll look at some of the most important and most common aspects of witchcraft, whatever your particular style or tradition. We'll reconsider certain practices, like creating sacred space and performing ritual that sometimes get taken for granted, or even go totally unexplained or unexamined in popular conversation. We'll also tackle topics that sometimes feel so complicated that they leave people wondering where to start, like interacting with gods or spirits and building meaningful ritual. Each chapter is full of ideas to help you expand your practice, reevaluate your thinking, and inspire you to move forward as a witch. I've also shared my experiences struggling at various points in my own craft. At the end of each chapter is a structured activity, which modifications based on one of the 4 classical elements that serve as the cornerstones to many types of witchcraft: air, fire, water, and earth. Are you a beginner looking to take your first steps? Look to air, the element of beginnings, the dawn and the awakening of a new way of thinking. Are you an advanced practitioner trying to shake up the routine? Consider water, to go deeper, to uncover further mysteries and to expand your experience. Are you just looking for easy ways to incorporate your witchcraft into a crowded schedule and build a routine? Fire will teach you quickness, efficiency, and an appreciation for getting straight to the point. Or are you dealing with burnout? Earth asks you to reconsider your foundations and examine what lies at the root of your practice. No matter where you are, you'll find strategies for jump-starting your craft practice. You may be at different places depending on the subject: a novice at working with the gods, if you even believe in them, and it's fine if you don't, but an old hand at spellcasting. Pick and choose as suits your needs, but don't treat these activities as optional. They are designed to push you to action, and that requires that you actually get up and do something. You should feel challenged but not overwhelmed, so choose accordingly. Where possible, I've also provided alternatives to visualization and lengthy periods spent in sitting meditation to accommodate witches with aphantasia, ADHD, and other cognitive needs that make such activities either unnecessarily difficult or even impossible. There are many ways to be a witch and practice magic, and I welcome you to modify the exercises in each chapter to suit your own unique situations. I've written this book so that you can skip around as you like, but if you heard from beginning to end, you'll notice that I've started with topics that are foundational, individual, and largely private. I then move to subjects that are more complex and potentially entail larger communities. We start with the most basic assumptions about what it means to be a witch, what witchcraft is for, and how our personal definitions, which so often change over time, impact our practice. From there, we explore personal sacred space, devotion, and working with entities other than ourselves, and then ritual and magic. We end with considerations of our interactions with others, moving into wider communities, whether online or off, and building plans for continuing to move forward to a stronger personal practice. If some of these things sound simple, it's because they are. But in order to build a strong, meaningful practice of the craft, we have to consider its most basic structures and tenets, even if we think we've already seen it all. Sometimes, next-level practice comes out of reconsidering those things we stopped looking at ages ago. If our foundations are weak, crumbling, or just straining from too much weight, we need to rebuild and reinforce them. Please note that I have chosen to capitalize witch and witchcraft throughout this book. This is largely for the sake of simplicity. Many witches choose to capitalize the word when referring to religious traditions of witchcraft, but to leave it lowercase when discussing historical cases of witchcraft or non-religious contemporary traditions. This practice, however, becomes overly complicated, especially when we add the abbreviation of craft, which is frequently capitalized even despite the previous convention. Because I am discussing many types of witchcraft, I chose to simplify and to provide specific context where necessary. Do not take this to mean that all witches are practicing a single tradition, or that those persecuted as witches throughout history are inherently related to contemporary witches. Additionally, I do not use Wicca and witchcraft interchangeably. Wicca is a type of witchcraft, and Wiccans are witches. But where I'm referring to Wicca, I will do so directly so as to avoid confusion. Where necessary, I also distinguish between eclectic forms of Wicca and traditional initiatory Wicca. Similarly, please note that God and Goddess are presented in lowercase unless they explicitly refer to the God or the Goddess as formal titles for Wiccan deities, whose names are generally regarded to be either secret or else unnecessary, as some Wiccan traditions teach that they encompass all gods and goddesses according to specific interpretations. I respect this convention where appropriate, but do not conflate it with the great variety of languages that other types of witches use to discuss the divine. There are no agreed-upon standards, even among witches of the same tradition. In any practice of witchcraft, it's normal to fall into a funk from time to time. We hit walls, life gets in the way, and we periodically have to recalibrate our beliefs and practices as we grow and change in other parts of our lives. My craft doesn't look the same as it did when I first started, and yours probably doesn't either. If you're new to witchcraft, you're already in the midst of big changes in your life. Dealing with change and pushing forward is part of the work of the witch. It can be difficult, but also a lot of fun. Enjoy the experience. Chapter 1. What exactly is witchcraft? Across history, the witch enchants us. Benevolent or wicked, youthful or haggard, man, woman, or someone, or something that defies such simple categorization. Witches have thrived throughout Western culture. They serve as both villains and heroes in favorite stories, as points of controversy and violence in history, and as inspiration in our personal spiritual explorations. We love them. We're afraid of them, and, for an increasing many, we are them. Given that the witch is such a complex figure, it's no surprise that witches generate so much confusion. What exactly makes someone a witch? How does a person become one? Why would someone want to? What types of witchcraft exist, and what makes them all distinct? What does a practice of witchcraft actually require and entail? We humans love rules and categories. We feel compelled to sort and label things, and that leads to lots of absolute statements about what things are and how we should talk about them. If you just went by today's internet hashtags, you might think a witch is a young, hip woman, and only a woman, with an interest in tarot cards and a massive crystal collection. She does yoga, has a perfect manicure, and is very interested in holistic healing. Before that, back when I was first learning about witchcraft in the 90s, witchcraft and Wicca were used interchangeably. A cursory glance through books from that era reveals a witch who adheres strictly to the rule of harm none and worships a triple goddess in the form of maiden, mother, and crone. All gods and goddesses are really aspects of one god and goddess. Witches were never dark, never practiced baneful magic, and were very adamantly practicing a religion. But let's go back even further. Just a few decades earlier, before Wicca was a term everyone knew, we had the witch cult. Contemporary witches met in secretive covens and were said to be practicing a surviving magical tradition indigenous to the British Isles. To be a witch, you had to be formally initiated and taught the sacred names of the gods and the working of the rites. The exact goings-on of coven life were secret, at least until writers like Gerald Gardner, Doreen Valiente, Justin Glass, Lois Bourne, Stuart Farrar, and many others began sharing material with the public. Even before this, witchcraft has been a family tradition, rooted in the folklore of the lands that birthed it, varying by region. And all along the way, witchcraft has been a Christian heresy, the path of the devil, and at times a crime punishable by death. So which of these is really witchcraft? Which should be our standard? The truth is that we don't agree on any single definition of witchcraft or on the exact nature of the witch. That's why there's so much variety. All those are types of witches, even where they contradict one another. Furthermore, most of these types of witches have existed at the same time. I've long since given up trying to come up with a single definition that will apply equally well to all times, cultures, and individuals. This usually just creates big headaches and anger, and I'm not convinced that it's all that useful an endeavor. Who and what a witch is, and what we think witchcraft can do, seems to depend more on who we are, what time period we occupy, and in what region we are than anything inherent or objective about witches. Instead, I prefer a pragmatic approach. Our real concern is our own practice, our own traditions, and our own communities. Others are free to construct their own definitions and boundaries as they see fit. For the purposes of this book, let's consider some of the things that these different types of witchcraft have in common. After all, just because we probably can't come up with a definition that satisfies everyone, that doesn't mean you shouldn't know damn well what witchcraft is for you. If you're new to the craft, some of this may be surprising. It often flies in the face of more popular circulated ideas about what witchcraft is, especially if your background is in contemporary eclectic forms of Wicca. If you're a more seasoned witch, this chapter is still worth your time. Sometimes the walls we hit in our own practice come out of long-standing assumptions about what it is that we're doing. If your perspectives about what witchcraft is, what it's for, and what it can do haven't changed since you first began practicing, then it can be valuable to reconsider things. If you arrive at the same conclusions, then your convictions will be stronger for it. If you discover something new or change your mind about something, then you'll have new avenues to explore. In either case, your own craft will be reinvigorated. Crossing boundaries. There's a reason why witches in fairy tales, fantasy novels, and horror movies are frequently villains. No matter how much good press contemporary witches earn, or how many times you yourself may insist to friends and acquaintances that you are practicing a life-affirming religion, that you don't worship Satan, that you don't practice baneful magic, that you strive for balance and harmony with nature, or whatever your go-to defense of your craft to outsiders has been, it just doesn't seem to sink in for most people. Aside from the fact that none of us can speak to what all witches do or don't do, some are in fact Satanists, many do practice baneful magic, and increasingly some do not consider what they do a religion. Witchcraft has a long and tangled history, and the idea that witches are automatically bad guys in the story isn't going to be undone in just a few decades. In fact, when we sit down and consider most of the storybook witches we grew up with, it's hard not to wonder if maybe we're the ones who have it wrong. They are, after all, usually inarguably villains. In the early 20th century, folklorist Margaret Murray, 1863 to 1963, concluded that the reason for this was conscious effort on the part of the various Christian churches taking control of Western Europe for more than 1,000 years. Witches, according to Murray, were practitioners of a pre-Christian religion indigenous to Europe, centered upon the worship of a horned god of the hunt, surviving from the Paleolithic era. That witches ended up being constantly cast in the role of the antagonist was the result of a consciously orchestrated campaign on the part of Christian leaders, seeking to justify exterminating their religious rivals. It's a lot easier to murder and oppress people if you first turn them into villains. Margaret Murray's ideas are no longer accepted by scholars today, but they held sway for decades and continue to inspire contemporary witches long after being discredited. If you've ever insisted that witchcraft is rooted in ancient religious practice, or that the horned god of the hunt and the goddess of the moon have survived in various forms throughout Europe, then Margaret Murray deserves a tip of your hat, even if you've never read her books. It bothered Murray, as it bothers many of us, that witches get such a bad rap. Arguably, one of the reasons why Gerald Gardner, Wicca's famed founder, came to emphasize his own practice as white witchcraft, and why the so-called Wiccan Rede and "It harm none, do as ye will" came to have so much prominence as Wicca developed was because witches of the day were so invested in changing popular perceptions. Until very recently, witchcraft was illegal in England, so it made sense for the witches at that time to work so hard to represent themselves as gentle and harmless, even if the real story was somewhat more complicated. Nonetheless, stories about evil, scary witches continue. Even in stories where witches are positive characters, they often have darker, less friendly kin. J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter franchise is the most obvious contemporary example in which we see witches as both heroes and villains. Consider further benevolent Cordelia Fox versus power-hungry Fiona Good in American Horror Story Coven, or the conflict between light witches and dark in Cami Garcia and Margaret Stoll's popular young adult novel Beautiful Creatures. In Kate Tiernan's Sweep series, teen witch Morgan Rowlands wonders if she can ever truly be good, despite being born to a dark clan of hereditary witches. Look at kind-hearted Sabrina Spellman versus the conniving weird sisters in Netflix's Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. In all these narratives, we have young witches choosing sides. In our contemporary storytelling, at the very least, we now believe that witches can be both good and evil, light and dark. Historically, both in imagination and in truth, Witches have been others. Good or evil, they are distinct from normal people because of the power they possess. They are either hated for it and hunted down, or sought out fearfully in times of great need. Even when they work their magic for good, witches are scary. They exist outside of society, whether literally, as when they make their homes outside the village walls, or figuratively, as in the case of the wealthy witch in the imposing.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?